And when you don't use all the racetrack, you are actually tightening the corner up more than you need to. Hi, this is Eric Wood, and welcome to GasOnBikeUp. This video is part 2 of our series on getting drives out of the corners. If you haven't yet seen part 1, please head on over to our YouTube channel and check it out there. It lays down some important concepts that sets the context for everything we're going to discuss in this video here. There are also some super valuable drills that will help you understand the limit of traction. But for now, let's get on to part 2 of this discussion on getting good drives. If you are overturning, we're talking about problem 2. This is not like a rider in my example where I was overcharging the corner, running through the corner too fast and running out of room on the outside. We're talking about problem 2, which is a rider who is not carrying enough roll speed or who is overturning or apexing too late unnecessarily. Those riders don't use all the racetrack. And when you don't use all the racetrack, you are actually tightening the corner up more than you need to. In fact, if you are going to look at a particular corner and we look at the exit and we say, here's the exit point where you should be, most riders should have used all the racetrack by now. If you find yourself in the center of the track, or even worse, on the inside of the track at that point, and I see many newer riders have this problem, what that means is, back in the most risky part of the corner, in the spot where you're most likely to have a high side, the only way you can end up mid-track or even tighter is in that most risky part of the zone, you actually leave the bike leaned over. You leave your handlebar input in too long, and you leave your lean angle in longer than you need to. You actually are going slower and giving yourself more risk at the same time. It is always less risky to let the motorcycle stand up and carry itself wider. You can see the edge of the racetrack coming a mile away. You can always roll out of your drive or pause your drive if you find yourself running too wide. So the test, if you want to know if you are carrying enough roll speed, if your drive is good enough, then once you're past your threshold of traction speed, then with a small amount of bar input, try and hold the tightest line you can. If you have the ability to tighten your line from the middle to the exit part of your drive, then that is the clear signal that you have time to go. So if you establish this, then step 2 is to increase your first 5% throttle. Now this happens very slowly. Normally we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, if 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is not doing it, then perhaps we go 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Now think about the reality of how small those numbers are. You're going from 0 to 5% throttle or 0 to 10% throttle. We're not talking half or 3/4. We're talking a little bit more throttle. Just enough you can feel a difference. All we want you to do is have your direction, allow your bike to stand up underneath you without holding it at all, and then add just another 3 or 4 degrees of throttle turn in the early part of your drive while you're relaxed. That initial 2 or 3 miles an hour can make a huge difference. And what you'll do is you'll add more drive and more drive and more drive until you find yourself getting carried wider on the way out of the corner. If you got to the point where you can roll on pretty quickly and there aren't consequences, then chances are you might be able to carry more roll speed through the middle of the corner. The key is to always be able to have direction and to open the throttle at the right point. In most drive-focused corners, that throttle on point is before the apex. If you start letting go of the brake lever a little sooner and carrying that extra few miles an hour, or perhaps braking lighter and longer and carrying more roll speed, you can continue to do that as long as you have direction, which means you can get back to positive throttle at the right time and add throttle and take away lean angle in a constant fashion. Lighter and longer on the brakes is a good second step. As you go through this process of adding a little more throttle or adding more roll speed, sometimes it's hard to feel if you're making an improvement. The key to making this happen successfully, to putting this whole plan together, is to anticipate what happens when you go one small step over the limit. The limit should not be a vicious high side. That's not the goal of what we're trying to do here. The goal is that you increase your roll speed and you increase your roll-on rate until you run a little wider than you are comfortable at some point in the corner, where you have to modulate your drive. You should take the corner that you're in and fully think this through. Anticipate what this is going to feel like and how you're going to react. If you plan how you're going to deal with a potential problem before it comes, it is way less stressful. In most cases, you simply need to pause your drive. But if you've come through a corner a little too fast and rolled on a little bit too hard, and you run wider than you should because you're doing the correct things with your body position and letting the bike stand up, then simply pausing your drive is often all it takes. In the worst case, you've got to roll out of it a little bit or maybe even touch a little bit of brake lever. But the realization you're running too wide often happens before you're even halfway through the exit and gives you plenty of time to correct. So anticipating what the problem is going to be long before you get there will make it a much less stressful situation. Remember, the number one cause of a high side is handlebar input. I'll say that again. The number one cause of high sides is handlebar input. Yes, of course, you can high side if you get way ahead of yourself. If you snap the throttle wide open and get way ahead of the engine. If you do that, there's not a lot I can do to help you. You kind of earned that one. However, if you're rolling on and there's a connection between your right wrist and the rear tire, there's not a lag, you're not waiting for the motor to catch up with your wrist, you're going whoop, and it's right there with you. If you do happen to step over the edge, the bike will not step out by a lot. You're not waiting for a lot of extra RPM to catch up. The motor will just whoop, catch up a little bit. Oftentimes you can simply hold it for a second and the bike will regain traction. However, if you look at the contact patch of your tire, there are 3 major loads. Now on the rear tire, we focus on 2 loads. The drive, which is the forward-backwards load, and the cornering load. However, there's a human load as well. Now on the front tire, that looks like this. It's the twisting of the front tire. Several hundred years ago, this guy named Newton came up with this theory, and it was simply this. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Bar input causes high sides because when you counter steer, if I'm taking a left-hand turn and I'm pushing on the left-hand bar, if I'm pushing on the inside of the bar, that takes my front contact patch and pushes it this way. That takes my rear contact patch and pushes it the other way. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. That extra force is compounded by the fact that as we carry speed through a left-hand corner, there's also the cornering force that acts perpendicular to our action. And in fact, as you go around a left-hand corner, that cornering force always tries to throw you to the outside. Well, your handlebar input force on the rear tire, again, you counter steer with the front tire, and that puts a side load on the back tire. That takes your carcass of your back tire and winds it up like a slingshot and adds all that extra load. So if it lets go with all that energy. And that's how high sides happen. Relaxing the bars, really focusing on gas on, bike up, especially in that pre-threshold of traction zone, will eliminate 90% of your high sides. Remember the goals through each of the sections of the drive. In the first 5% throttle, you want to get the bike going as quickly as you can without upsetting the chassis. Once you've got past that first 5%, and we're going from say the 5% to 25% roll on, we're simply trying to accelerate as hard as we can without getting the throttle ahead of the engine, without having that whoop where the bike has to catch up, where we have the linear connection between our right wrist and our rear tire, while at the same time fully releasing ourselves so the bike can move completely independently of us and stand up as much as it wants. And then finally, from the 25 to 100% mark, that rate of roll-on will happen probably 2 to 3 times faster than the 0 to 25% mark. In fact, I used to say the first 25% of your throttle takes about as much time as the remaining 75%. Of course, that's not a hard and fast rule, but that's a good place to start. What happens as you get experience, when the risk of high side is reduced, either through increased speed or decreased lean angle, then you have the courage to roll on quickly and more aggressively. And that will improve as you gain experience. It's worth stating out loud that these approaches to the limit are for track riders only. You should never be doing this on the street. The habits we talk about here, using your vision properly, of using your body properly and having smooth roll on, that applies everywhere. But the degree of application changes significantly from the racetrack to the street. We obviously don't want to be riding anywhere near the limit when we're riding on public roads. In analyzing this, there's 2 basic tools that I use. One is, if you want to get immediate feedback, then you simply pick a reference point partway down the straightaway, well in advance of the brake zone, so you're not concerned about having to lose focus on your brake point. You can glance down at the tack and record what your RPM is. You have a target RPM where you start at, say it's 10.3, and if you go through a bunch of iterations, sometimes it's hard to feel speed on the exit. But if you see 10.6 on your attack instead of 10.3, you know you made a really big difference. And of course, these days, the post-ride analysis is great. Many of our lap timers have GPS, and I will always use my terminal straightaway speed, my ability to consistently log a faster mile an hour at the end of the straightaway, as a clear indicator that I got the drive right. In the end, having the fastest terminal straightaway speed, getting wide open the soonest, is your main goal. We hope as you apply these concepts, you'll enjoy greater speed with less risk. In future videos, we'll talk about applying these concepts to more complex corners, double apexes, long corners, chicanes, all that type of thing. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe to this channel and check out our other content. And until then, ride fast, ride safe.